la santa palabra del Señor. No estoy. Gloria a Dios. Gloria a Dios.
Gloria a Dios, aleluya.
Santo eres, Señor.
Honramos la santa palabra del Señor y la vamos a leer bajo la bendición del Padre y del Hijo y del Espíritu Santo de Dios.
Amén.
Está en el Evangelio según San Mateo, capítulo 26, verso 36 en adelante.
Matthew chapter 26, verse 36 and on.
Y dice así a la letra: entonces llegó Jesús con ellos a un lugar que se llama Getsemaní y dijo a sus discípulos: sentado aquí, entre tanto que voy allí y oro. Y tomando a Pedro y a los dos hijos de Zebedeo, comenzó a entristecerse y a angustiarse en gran manera.
Then Jesus came with them to a place and said to the disciples, sit here while I go and pray over there. And he took with him Peter and two sons of Zebedee, and he began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed.
Damos gracias al Señor, amén, hermano. Entonces, tomar asiento, quizás le podríamos poner la sazón de la oración, como título, la sazón de la oración. Y qué mejor ejemplo que nuestro Señor Jesucristo para enseñarnos a orar.
So today's title is the season of prayer, as in seasoning of prayer, not a time season. And who better to give us an example of how to pray than Jesus Christ?
Un saludo afectuoso a todas las personas que nos escuchan por la internet. Que Dios les bendiga grandemente.
As per usual, a warm hello and welcome. God bless you to everybody that's listening to us online. We hope this message is a blessing to you and others.
Bien, lo primero que podemos ver en esta porción de la palabra que acabo de leer es que es curioso que los 4 evangelios registran este momento del Señor Jesucristo antes de ser arrestado.
So the first thing that I want to point out is how curious it is that all of the Gospels depict this moment exactly like this, right before Jesus is arrested.
En varias partes de los evangelios se registra que el Señor subía a la montaña y oraba por los enfermos, oraba por, o sea, diferente. Pero antes de ser arrestado, está registrado en los 4 evangelios y hay algo muy curioso ahí.
So again, in all of the Gospels, there are a couple of differences because it's told by different people, so there's going to be differences. But in every single Gospel, we see this particular part exactly the same, just before he was arrested.
Por supuesto que podemos esperar del Señor Jesucristo, el unigénito Hijo de Dios, palabras sencillas: Padre, tú me escuchas, yo sé que siempre me escuchas, lo digo por causa de los que me están oyendo.
And perhaps we've come to expect very simplistic words from the only begotten Son of God. God, Father, I know that you hear me. Father, I know that you're with me. Father, I pray because of them.
Una oración que es una orden, por ejemplo, con la hija de Jairo, Talita Kumi, que significa levántate niña, o a ti te digo niña, levántate.
Or sometimes the prayer was less of asking and more of a command, as in, I tell you to rise up.
Oraciones ejecutivas de autoridad, el Señor dando una clara demostración del poder que está en Él.
These were prayers full of authority, depicting who Jesus really was, the power that he had within him.
Reprendiendo demonios, al caso el muchacho lo trajeron que lo arrojaba al fuego, solamente lo echó fuera y ya, y los discípulos, ¿por qué nosotros no pudimos?
Or prayers that proved to be so easy peasy. For example, when they brought the kid that would constantly fall into the quote unquote fire, and Jesus just told the demon, get out. And the disciples were astonished and asked them, how could you do it? But we couldn't.
Todas esas oraciones demuestran la llenura que tenía el Señor Jesucristo, o que tiene el Señor Jesucristo, y la autoridad que tiene cuando ora, el poder en la palabra que emite por sus labios.
All of these prayers are just showing the type of person that Jesus was and is, the power that he had then, the power that he continues to have now.
Es la misma palabra mediante la cual se sostienen los cielos y la tierra.
It's the exact same authority or word that is able to sustain the creation.
Pero algo muy diferente es cuando Él va a orar, a exponer sus propias necesidades delante de su Padre.
But we see such a big contrast when it's him before the Father talking about his needs and desires.
Y en esto nos da ejemplo a nosotros. Nosotros podemos en determinados momentos, Señor, bendice a fulano y a otro, pero otra cosa es muy diferente en nuestra oración con nuestro Padre Celestial.
And that is a really good example for us, because there's a difference between when we're praying for somebody else saying, God, I hope that you bless such and such person. And it's very different from when we should be before him, humbled before him.
El Señor nos enseñó en cuanto a nuestra oración que cuando tengamos necesidad nos pongamos un lugar aparte y oremos al Señor en secreto, y el Padre que oye en los secretos pues nos recompensará en público.
And for example, the part of the scriptures that talks about when you have something that's weighing deep on your heart or heavy on your heart, go into your hidden place, and when you're there, go ahead and pray to the Father in your hidden place in quietness, and your Father that hears you is going to reward you in public.
Pero me ha llamado sobremanera la atención lo que pasó con esta oración del Señor Jesucristo.
But it's captured my attention what happened with this specific prayer of Jesus.
Desde que llegué a los caminos del Señor, siempre ha venido a mi mente este detalle, que Él se entristecía y se acongojaba para orar.
Ever since I came to the feet of Christ, I've always been moved by the fact that Jesus himself, he was moved to tears. He was just deeply, quote unquote, troubled when he came before the Father.
Entraba en una especie de agonía,
He kind of entered into the zone of agony,
como si fuera lo último que iba a hacer, como si fuera la última oportunidad que tendría para hablar con su Padre.
It was almost like as if he was praying, as if it was his last time being able to pray to the Father.
Y si el Señor nos da esa enseñanza, siendo Él el unigénito Hijo de Dios, teniendo su gloria como la tiene, si Él sintió esa necesidad, ¿cuánto más debemos sentirla nosotros?
And if this is Jesus that we're talking about, the Son of God, the Son of the Father that he's praying to, and he's so deeply moved in this moment and so humbled, how is it that we are not able to do the same thing? Or in other words, he's teaching us that we should be doing the same thing.
No podemos olvidar de ninguna manera, ¿verdad?, que nosotros somos seres humanos y que Cristo Jesús asumió una persona igualita que nosotros, cuerpo igual, con las mismas características, lo único que no fue hallado pecado en Él.
And we have to always keep in mind that Jesus was in fact just like any of us. The only difference being is that he wasn't born from sin, therefore he didn't have any sin. He made the effort to not have sin, he didn't have any.
En otras palabras, estaba sujeto a hambre, a sed, a necesidad, dolor, angustia, cansancio.
He was subjected to all of the things that any person is subjected to, hunger, thirst, etc.
Y por supuesto, no voy a decir miedo, pero sí temor, no por lo que se le venía encima, sino por la situación por la que tenía que pasar.
And I don't necessarily want to call it fear, but let's call it what it is. There was some sort of emotion within him that troubled him enough to pray to the Father, and it wasn't because he knew what he had to do, but the fact that he knew exactly what he had to go through to get that done.
No temor a que el Padre le fuera a fallar, porque Dios no se equivoca ni falla. Temor a que Él, como ser humano que en ese momento asumió, pudiera en determinado momento dudar o alguna cosa.
And it wasn't that he was thinking that the Father could abandon him or fail in one way or another, because the Father doesn't do that. It was that him in his flesh, in the moment of flesh, he wasn't sure, or it's not that he wasn't sure, but he was having, again, let's call it what it is. It was fear. It was a sort of emotion of what he had to go through to complete his purpose.
Hay personas que piensan que el Señor Jesucristo podía pasar por eso automáticamente y no le pasaba nada. No, el Señor Jesucristo se hizo tan hombre como cualquiera de nosotros.
And lots of people have this idea depicting Jesus that he was just going to waltz on through, do his thing, and he was not going to feel anything, and he was going to do it 100% okay. No, he was a human being. He had emotions, and he felt lots of pain too.
Capaz de sentir todas las sensaciones que tenemos nosotros por consiguiente el dolor, la angustia, la tristeza, la necesidad, el hambre, la sed, el cansancio, todo eso lo sintió.
And again, him being human meant that he felt all of the ranges of emotions. He felt all of the range of needs that the human body could feel, just like any of us can feel.
Tenía que ser tentado en todo y pasar la prueba.
He had to be tempted in absolutely every aspect, and he had to pass with flying colors.
Porque si no la pasaba no nos podía redimir.
Because if he didn't pass those temptations, he couldn't redeem us.
Él tenía que asumir la misma responsabilidad que asumió Adán.
He had to assume the same responsibility that Adam had taken.
Y pasar la prueba superando a Adán.
But on the other hand, he had to go past what Adam had done and actually fulfill the purpose, fulfill the responsibility, unlike Adam.
Entonces cuando lo vemos en Getsemaní, lo vemos como un ser humano de verdad angustiado.
So when we see him in this point in time, we're seeing him as a human that is truly in agony. He's hurting.
Ahora, una cosa es, hermano, lo que yo puedo decirle, sí, estaba angustiado, estaba triste, estaba acongojado allí, se empezó a entristecer.
Now, one thing is for me to tell you, yes, he was feeling sad, he was feeling this, he was feeling that, he had all of these emotions.
Y otra cosa es lo que en realidad ocurrió.
And another is what actually truly happened.
El traductor
The translator
tiene cualquier cantidad de palabras sinónimas para sin necesidad de repetir, traer a la mente de nosotros una imagen de lo que pasó allí.
The translator or translators, they have the ability to use many different words with one same meaning, so that at the end of the day, it's making an image form in our minds of what's going on and what we're reading.
Y entonces utiliza, por lo menos en la versión Reina Valera 1960, utiliza comenzó a entristecerse y a angustiarse en gran manera.
So we're going to go into the different translations. For example, one of the translations, loosely translated right now, talks about how he began to get sad and he began to agonize.
Esa palabra comenzó
That word to begin or began
significa estaba tranquilo y empezó un proceso.
it indicates that he was at first calm, not doing nothing, and then all of a sudden he started a process. He began something.
Cuando usted está escribiendo algo, para evitar utilizar la misma palabra, la redundancia que se llama, usted utiliza palabras sinónimas.
When you're writing and you're trying to depict something and you don't want to use the same word 10,000 times, you have synonyms that you can use.
Que signifiquen más o menos lo mismo, ¿verdad? Y que puedan dejar claro el panorama que se quiere presentar.
So these words are similar in meaning or have generally the same meaning, and all the point is for them to show the reader an image.
Entonces cuando nos dice que comenzó, lo primero que viene a la mente de nosotros es que hubo un cambio en su rostro.
So when we read the word began, he began, we can imagine that there was a change in his aspect, his physical aspect, his face.
Hubo un cambio en su actitud.
There was a shift in his attitude.
Hay momentos, hermano, en que usted puede estar tranquilo y alguna palabra lo toca y usted siente un nudo en la garganta e inmediatamente su rostro cambia.
For example, when you're hearing something and it triggers you or it creates some sort of emotion and you feel that knot in your throat, your face drops immediately.
Hay momentos que usted recuerda algo que de verdad le toca el corazón y inmediatamente sus ojos empiezan a lagrimear.
Or when you see or remember or hear something that, again, triggers you and your eyes start shedding tears.
Hay momentos en que usted está hablando algo y del corazón le viene un sentimiento que le quiebra la voz.
Or when you're talking about something and you start feeling some sort of emotion within you and your voice cracks.
Toda esa situación dibuja más o menos lo que estaba pasando con el Señor en ese momento.
All of these different situations or scenarios is pointing to what Jesus was going through in this moment.
10:30, 11 de la noche más o menos, y quizás un poco más temprano, no sé, o a lo mejor más tarde, pero en un lugar, un huerto.
So this was sometime in the evening, and he was in the middle of some sort of garden.
Se supone que no es el lugar de habitación normal del Señor, sino que como por tiempo de las fiestas subían, pues utilizaban ciertos sitios donde podían descansar.
Now, it's to be understood that this wasn't where Jesus always had a tendency to sleep. It's just they were in the middle of different celebrations, and people used to sleep in different places when they went up to these cities to celebrate.
Probablemente el Señor había escogido uno de esos sitios en el mismo huerto, de uno de los lugares más altos, donde podía estar a solas, donde podía derramar su alma delante de su Padre.
And it's to be understood, or at least it's my understanding, that at one point he went up to the highest point, or one of the highest points of this garden, so that he could be alone with his Father and pray.
Muchas veces Dios me ha permitido experimentar, o no experimentar, sino participar de vigilias en campos donde uno puede apartarse a ciertos lugares y derramar su corazón delante del Señor.
I've had the blessing, the opportunity to take part in different vigils, especially back in Venezuela, where we were in the middle of absolutely nowhere, and we could separate ourselves and have a alone time with God.
No es lo mismo participar de una vigilia acá en un local y con todas las comodidades que hacerlo en pleno llano o en plena montaña, bajo un frío que le cala los huesos a uno. Son cosas diferentes.
It's very different when you have a vigil in a cozy building like this, where you got your AC, you got your heat if you need it. It's very different from when you're in the middle of absolutely nowhere and it's cold at night or very, very hot in the day, etc.
Momento en que usted quisiera arroparse completo y se acuerda que no puede taparse la cabeza porque es obligación.
Or, for example, as a man, when you're praying and you feel really, really cold and you're out in the middle of nowhere and you want to cover yourself, you know that you can't, because the Bible tells a man he can't cover his head when he prays.
Que está postrado y no conoce el lugar y tiene temor, una serpiente o una araña, qué sé yo, algún animal, pero siempre va primero el anhelo de orar.
And you might realize that around you there's maybe some snakes or some scorpions ready to do their little scorpion thing or whatever's going on, but you're realizing that in that moment you're alone with God, and that's the purpose.
Yo no sé si alguno de ustedes ha tenido esa bendición de poder orar así en el campo, en un lugar apartado y a 10 horas de la noche bastante avanzadas.
I have no idea if any of you have been able to have the blessing to be, again, in the middle of nowhere and have that super quiet, intimate time with God.
Hay una sensación bien especial.
It's a very special sensation or feeling.
Es como no es que uno se siente más cerca de Dios,
And it's not that you somehow feel closer to God,
sino que uno siente más libertad de hablarle al Señor.
but it's that you feel more freedom to speak to God.
Uno siente que realmente en ese momento depende de Dios.
You feel in that moment that you're truly depending on God.
Uno puede tranquilamente derramar su corazón delante del Señor, no importa quién esté por allá, por el otro lado, porque nadie va a estar pendiente de su oración.
And in that moment, it doesn't matter who's around you, because again, you're in the middle of nowhere, nobody's around you, you're by yourself, you're in an intimate moment with God.
He presenciado oraciones de personas que en campos así que se han soltado a llorar, pero angustiados.
And I've walked past people who were in these desolate places, and they were sitting there really emptying out their heart before God and shedding lots of tears.
No quiere esto decir que no se puede efectuar aquí. Nosotros tenemos en la Biblia el caso de la mamá de Samuel. Estaba en el templo derramando su corazón, orando, y Elí la vio y creyó que estaba borracha.
And that's not to say that we can't have that same experience of emptying our hearts. in a place like a temple. We can take, for example, the mom of Samuel, who she was found praying in the temple because she wanted to have a kid, and some priest came up and thought she was drunk because she was praying and crying.
Pero esa oración hermosa, donde uno se angustia, donde uno se siente abandonado en las manos, abandonado en el aspecto de entregarse en las manos del Señor, es la oración más eficaz que yo he conocido.
My whole point of saying all of this stuff is that at the end of the day, the most growth that you will find, or the best sort of prayer that you can potentially or go through, is when you completely abandon yourself in a good way in the hands of God. Give everything to Him in that intimate moment.
Las horas se van y usted no se da cuenta.
Hours go by and you didn't even notice.
Y es una cercanía tan hermosa que vaya, quizás a usted le va a parecer que estoy mintiendo, pero sabe Dios que no. Es una cercanía tan hermosa que usted inclusive puede hablar con, Dios me ha permitido hablar hasta con ángeles.
So for example, you might not believe what I'm about to say, but I've experienced it personally. When you're sitting there and you're praying and you truly give yourself into this intimate moment, and God gives you the ability to start speaking with spiritual beings. We're talking about angels speaking with Him.
Y no es una cosa que se le embolata la mente a uno, no, es algo real.
And we're not saying, it's not like your mind is just going off and doing its own thing and you're imagining these angels. No, they're literally in front of you and you can speak to them.
Yo recuerdo que una vez tuve una experiencia bien tremenda. Yo le estaba orando al Señor por una necesidad muy particular.
I'm going to give you a story or an example. I remember one time I was praying to God for a particular need that I had.
Estaba siendo sometido a persecución, tenía una situación económica difícil, había problemas en la iglesia, y yo me sentía abrumado, de verdad me sentía acosado.
I felt completely overwhelmed and overstimulated by many things that were going on in my life at that moment. Financial burdens, I felt like I was being persecuted by everybody, issues at church, etc. In general, I was extremely overwhelmed and stressed.
Quizás parezca, no sé, exagerado lo que hice, pero cuando uno se abandona en las manos del Señor, habla con el Señor.
And it may seem to you like what I'm about to talk to you about is a little exaggerated, or what I did was exaggerated, but when you have a need and you abandon yourself in the presence of God, it's the best thing.
Mi situación era de sí o sí, o salgo de esta situación o yo no sé qué va a pasar.
And in my desperation, I was thinking, listen, I'm either going to get out of the situation or I don't know what I'm about to do.
Es cuando uno llega, uno dice, llegué al llegadero, de aquí ya no puedo pasar, o Dios me abre puerta, o yo no sé qué va a pasar.
It's kind of like that phrase, I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place, where you're completely stuck and you don't know where to go, so you're like, God, you got to do something, you got to get me out of here, I'm stuck.
Vaya, mírelo más o menos como que usted sabe que va a amanecer, no hay comida, no hay dinero, no hay cómo movilizarse, no hay una salida, y usted solamente espera que venga del cielo.
So put yourself in my position. I knew that when I was going to wake up, there was not going to be any mode of transportation, there was not going to be any food in the table, in the refrigerator, anywhere in the near vicinity. There was no job, no money, there was nothing, completely quote-unquote alone in that moment, so I only had God to turn to.
O sea, esas situaciones extremas donde uno de verdad no encuentra una salida, todo está cerrado, todo está bloqueado, no hay qué hacer y uno tiene la carga encima y no haya cómo salir adelante.
So in other words, we're talking about these extreme situations in life where you have all of these roadblocks, and those roadblocks, instead of being roadblocks, you feel like they're ginormous mountains in front of you, and you don't know where to go, you don't know how to conquer this mountain, you're stuck.
Uno puede llegar a esa situación cuando se encuentra acosado por una tentación.
You can find yourself in that situation when, for example, you feel tempted by something.
Cuando se encuentra en necesidad económica.
or you feel financially you're lacking,
en necesidad de salud,
or your health is lacking,
en angustia por algún familiar.
or you're feeling some sort of way because of a family member.
Son múltiples las causas por las cuales uno puede llegar a una situación de esas.
I mean, whatever situation you've been through, you're going through, that situation is your roadblock, your mountain.
Yo llegué a esa situación en un momento en que había problemas en mi hogar, había problemas en la comunidad, en la iglesia, había problemas y yo no hallaba qué hacer.
So again, I had gotten to a point where I had issues coming left and right, forwards and backwards, church, family, work life, all of it. I was struggling.
Dios me estaba llamando y yo estaba puesto en estrecho. ¿Cómo hago? Si voy para allá pierdo esto. Aquello era serio.
God had given me a specific calling at this time, and I was stuck because I didn't know whether I should go over here or stay over here because I was going to lose so many things. I was just stuck.
Yo me di cuenta que la lucha no era ni con mi familia, ni era con mi pastor, ni era con los hermanos. La lucha era con el enemigo.
And I realized that the issue, my fight was not against the family, the church, my work. It was against the enemy.
Yo dije, bueno, esta pelea yo solo no la puedo ganar.
And I told myself, this fight, I can't win it alone.
A veces nos creemos, hermano, porque decía el Señor te reprenda, diablo, con eso lo arreglamos.
Sometimes we think that it's as easy as rebuking the devil and he's going to scurry away. That's not how it works.
A veces nos creemos porque con la sangre de Cristo me cubro, con eso solucionamos el problema y no es así.
Or we think that sometimes it's just, I cover myself with the blood of Christ and all my situations, they're diminished. Nothing else is going to happen.
Si hay personas que son necias en el aspecto de que no dejan quieto a uno, Satanás lo es con mucho más todavía.
If you've ever encountered somebody, which I'm sure we all have, that a person that will just not leave you alone and they keep picking on you and bothering you, imagine how much worse the devil is.
Cuando Satanás se empeña en molestarle la paciencia a alguien, es que se la molesta de verdad.
Because when the devil shows up and he has it in his tiny brain that he wants to go ahead and hurt somebody, well then he's going to stick to it.
Y si las personas no saben utilizar las armas espirituales que tienen, pues por supuesto que van a perder la batalla.
And if people don't know how to move their spiritual weapons, then they're going to lose this battle.
Esto no quiere decir que el Señor Jesucristo va a dejar que lo arrastren y lo desbaraten. Siempre va a salir Cristo de alguna manera defendiendo.
And I'm not saying that Jesus is going to let you just sit there and get your face rocked back and forth. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is he does eventually show up, but sometimes we go through issues.
Pero el Señor nos ha dado a nosotros herramientas poderosas para usarlas.
God has given us weapons, powerful weapons that we can use in these situations.
Y yo recuerdo que esa noche yo estaba orando y había una vigilia y todo el mundo estaba en lo que estaba, pero yo estaba en lo que estaba.
And I remember that night, everybody was off doing their own thing, but I was in my intimate moment.
Y yo recuerdo que yo le dije, Señor, yo te voy a pedir algo.
And I remember I showed up and I told God, I'm going to ask you for something.
Yo le dije, Señor, yo quiero que tú envíes un ángel de tu presencia con una espada de fuego que me defienda.
And I asked him, I said, God, I'm going to ask you right now to send an angel from your presence with a sword that's on fire to defend me.
Usted podrá decir, oye, hermano, usted sí es exagerado.
You might be looking at me sideways right now thinking that I'm crazy.
No, hermano, cuando usted comprende lo que significan las potestades superiores, no hay exageraciones.
Listen, when you start to understand the power that these spiritual beings have, this is an exaggeration. You're going to know how to use them.
¿Usted cree que el Señor Jesucristo exageró cuando le dijo a Poncio Pilato, le dijo, si yo quisiera le pido a mi Padre una legión de ángeles? Él no exageró, él sabe perfectamente bien lo que se estaba enfrentando.
For example, when Jesus was still here on earth and he said that he could ask the Father to bring down a legion of angels, he wasn't exaggerating. He could literally ask for that. And legions, it's a lot, but it's not all that he has.
A veces entramos en desesperación y vemos todo perdido porque no hacemos uso de las armas que el Señor nos entregó.
And sometimes we're in these situations and we feel so completely lost because we refuse to move the weapons that God has given us.
Y creemos que con solo llorarle al Señor, con eso arreglamos el problema.
And we think that just by showing up and shedding a tear before God, the situation is resolved and He's going to take care of it.
La palabra del Señor dice bien claro que nos ha dado autoridad.
Well, the Word of God clearly tells us that He's given us authority.
Ahora yo no me puedo parar y decir un ángel, usted venga acá y sírvame. Yo no puedo hacer eso.
And listen, you can't show up and go before an angel and say, hey, listen, buddy, I need you to come over here, I need you to help me out. It
Pero
doesn't
sí
work
puedo
like that.
decirle, Señor, envía un ángel de tu presencia que me defienda.
But what I can do, or what you can do,
Yo
is
soy
tell
tu
God,
hijo.
God, I need you to send an angel down here to help me out, and He will do
Yo
it.
soy tu hijo, Señor, y estoy bajo la promesa.
And you can tell Him, listen, I am your child, I am under the promise.
Y tú enviarás tus ángeles, Señor, para que mi pie no tropiece en piedra.
And because your scriptures say that you will send your angels to help me out so I don't stumble.
Yo sé que el enemigo es poderoso, pero más poderoso es usted, Señor.
And I know that the devil in my situation is very strong and powerful, but you are even more so powerful. You are
Yo
almighty.
solo no puedo,
I can't do it on my
pero con
own.
Cristo soy más que vencedor.
But with God, I am more than victorious.
Amén, hermano. Pues bueno, hermano, yo le pedí así al Señor.
All right, so that's how I ask God.
Hermano, le va a decir a usted que se lo envió.
And you might be saying, all right, did He really send you a fiery sword and an angel
Pues sí, me
attached
lo
to
envió
it?
inmediatamente.
And well, let me tell you, He sent it right then and there.
Y la sorpresa me la llevo yo que estoy de rodillas cuando veo aquel personaje parado frente a mí.
And my biggest surprise, my biggest shock is when I'm knelt before God praying, and all of a sudden I see the feet of these
Y
angels.
una espada que yo echaba candela, esa espada parecía un soplete de fuego ahí al lado de él así.
And I remember looking up and seeing the sword, and I could see the sword was quite literally on fire.
Entonces me di cuenta de lo que yo había pedido.
And that's when I realized what I had just asked for.
Y yo todavía dije, espérate un momento. Le dije, mira, yo no te quiero ahí, yo te quiero aquí a mi lado.
So I remember talking to the angel at that moment, and I said, okay, listen, so I don't want you here, I want you here
Aquello
by
fue
my side.
increíble, hermano. Eso fue.
And I remember it was incredible. It was like a little chess piece. He just moved like this.
Eso no es que se movió a caminar, no, eso fue. ¡Guau, guau!
And it wasn't that my man, the angel, took a stroll. No, he literally did a little chess piece move and
Yo me
got to my
sentí tan
side.
chiquitico
And I felt so tiny in that moment.
que yo dije, bueno, aquí nadie me toca porque con este que está a mi lado,
And I remember saying to myself, ain't nobody going to touch me now, because with this one that's
yo
standing
estoy más
next
que
to me,
protegido.
I am more than
¿Y
protected.
sabe qué?
And do you know something?
Muchas personas, para la gloria de Dios, han visto ese ángel.
Many people, for the glory of God, still to this day see that angel.
Una vez toqué la puerta de una casa en Mérida,
I remember one time I was back in Venezuela, and I knocked on somebody's door.
una casa de una familia cristiana que hacía muchos años que no lo veía,
It was the house of a Christian family. Hadn't seen them in many years.
y salió una muchacha y abrió la puerta y ella levantó la cara así, hizo así y se fue para atrás y cerró la puerta y salió en carrera.
I remember some young lady, she opened the door, and instead of looking at me, she kind of kept her gaze moving up and up and up and up, and then she randomly closed the door and ran away.
Yo le dije, señorita, señorita.
And I called after her, and I was like, young lady, hello, and then she just kept running.
Al ratito vino el señor de la casa.
Later on, the gentleman of the house, the guy of the house, he showed
Nelson,
up,
¿cómo estás?
and he said, Brother Nelson, how are you?
Pues aquí, mi hermano, oye, ¿qué pasó con esta muchacha? Miró para arriba así, salió en carrera. Yo, espérese que le pase el susto y ella viene y le cuenta qué fue lo que pasó.
And I asked him right off the bat, listen, what happened? Some young girl opened the door and then she ran off. And he said, well, let her get over the fear and then she's going to come up and she's going to talk to you.
Ya, pasado un rato vino la muchacha y me dijo, ay hermano, qué personaje tan precioso carga usted a su lado.
And a little bit later, the young girl came up and she said, listen, brother, you have the most beautiful creature beside you, or being beside you.
Gloria a Dios.
And I said, glory be to
Entonces
God.
quiere decir que Dios de verdad responde.
So again, that means God does answer.
Y si responde a la oración de pobre tonto, ¿cómo no va a responder a la oración de su Hijo amado?
Now, if God listened to the prayer of little old me, how was he not going to listen to the prayer of his son?
Entonces a mí siempre me ha llamado la atención cómo es que el Señor Jesucristo empezó a contritarse.
So it's always caught my attention how Jesus started getting saddened or
Se me metió en
agonizing.
la cabeza de que yo tenía que encontrar el secreto.
So in my head, I got really stubborn as I usually do, and I decided, hey, I need to find the answer to this.
Porque Cristo no hace las cosas por gusto.
Because Christ doesn't do things just because.
Todas las cosas Cristo las hace para enseñarnos a nosotros.
Christ does everything to show us something.
Entonces, pero, ¿qué pudo haber ocurrido? que pusiera al Señor en esa situación.
All right, so what could have happened to make Jesus go through the situation, or not go through the situation, but feel that in his situation?
Empecemos por algo que nosotros hacemos.
So I started off with something that we all do.
Nos olvidamos del Señor Jesucristo rapidito.
We have a tendency to forget about Christ very easily,
Por cualquier cosa.
for anything.
De hecho, venimos al culto y estamos en el culto y nos dormimos con facilidad.
For example, we could literally be sitting here in the temple and we fall asleep right away.
Eso le pasó a los discípulos.
That happened to the disciples.
El Señor les está anunciando que viene algo grande y ellos no podían con el sueño.
So Jesus is telling them there's something big that's coming, and the disciples are literally snoozing in a corner.
Usted sabe lo que significa no tener en quién confiar de verdad para que lo defienda a uno en el momento.
Do you know what it feels like to be completely, quote unquote, alone and feel like nobody can defend you?
Saber que uno se va a enfrentar a algo terrible y que lo tiene que hacer solo porque más nadie lo va a acompañar.
Knowing that you're going through a situation or you're about to go up against a situation, and knowing that you have to do it alone because nobody else is going to help you.
Pedro dijo, no, hasta la muerte, Señor.
And of course, Peter in the corner was like, no, until death do us part.
Saber que Pedro lo iba a negar.
And knowing Jesus deep down that Peter himself was going to say that he didn't even know him.
Saber que venía alguien por ahí a quien él le dio la confianza de ser tesorero, lo ayudó en todas formas y que ahora viene con un poco de tropa y lo va a entregar.
Knowing that Judah was literally right around the corner, somebody that he had loved, given confidence to, fed the guy. I mean, he was coming down to basically give Jesus over to the government.
Saber que Marta, María, Lázaro, todos ellos se van a quedar.
Knowing that Martha, Mary, Lazarus, all of those were just going to be in the background now.
Aún su señora madre va a pasar por el dolor y la angustia de verlo crucificado.
Knowing that his own mother was going to have to see him crucified.
Son miles y miles de personas que van a sentir dolor, que van a sentir.
And there were going to be so many people that were going to feel the pain of his death, of his crucifixion.
Saber que tiene el poder de reventar todo y no poder usarlo.
Knowing that he had the power to just say, I'm going to get off this cross and keep on going my way, and he was
No
not going to
puede
use
de
it.
ninguna manera.
He wasn't going to use that power.
Saber que va a ser tentado, va a tener que callarse la boca.
Knowing that he was going to be tempted and he had to keep his mouth shut.
Usted sabe cosa triste que lo acusen a uno de algo que uno no ha hecho.
Do you know something that's really sad? Being accused of something that you know for a fact you never did.
Algo tan terrible para él decir que estaba blasfemando contra su propio padre.
I mean, it's insane. People saying that he was blaspheming against God, his literal father.
Lo que él amaba tanto su pueblo, lo que ama tanto su pueblo, el templo, todas esas cosas, y de repente que sean ellos mismos los que lo están entregando.
The fact that he came down to his nation, his people, because they are the chosen ones. They were the ones that he loved the most, and they were the ones that turned around and crucified him.
Él lo sabía,
And he knew that's what was coming.
pero hay algo que nosotros nos olvidamos.
But there's something that we have a tendency to forget.
Una cosa es prender el fuego
One thing is to light the fire,
para cocinar algo,
to cook something on it,
y otra cosa es meter la mano en el fuego para que se cocine.
and another thing is to light the fire and then put your hand in it so you can roast your hand.
Una cosa es ver a alguien enfermo y orar por ese enfermo,
So again, there's a difference between seeing somebody go through it, be sick,
y
have a
otra
disease,
cosa es que
whatever.
la enfermedad lo alcance a uno.
And another very different thing is when you now have that disease or sickness.
Una cosa es sentir angustia por el dolor de alguien que está sufriendo un dolor y uno le da lástima y esto.
And it's very different when you see somebody else struggling, when they're feeling some sort of pain or have an issue.
Y otra cosa es tomar el vinagre, lo amargo del dolor y sentir uno el dolor.
And another very different thing is when your body is the one that's being crippled by this pain.
Una cosa es ir donde la persona que está a punto de fallecer
Another is to see somebody who's about to pass away.
y tratar de consolar a la gente, pero bueno, no soy yo, es él.
And you're trying to console, or you're seeing this person trying to console their loved ones, but you're not really that person. You don't know what they're going through.
Y otra cosa es saber que se está a minutos de morir.
And another very different thing is when you're the one that's minutes from death.
son cuestiones diferentes.
Two very different things.
Entonces, cuando leemos que el Señor empezó a contristarse,
So when we see that Jesus begins to get saddened or agonized,
empezó a recordar cosas,
he started remembering things.
a presentarse delante de sí lo que venía,
So what was about to happen started presenting itself.
a presentarse delante de sí cuántas veces le habló a la gente y la gente lo menospreció.
And he started remembering all the times that he spoke to so many people and they all thought he was crazy.
A recordar con dolor, con angustia, cuántas veces fue menospreciado él por su propia mamá y sus propios hermanos.
Or how many times his own family members, we're talking about brothers and his mom, looked at him like he was insane, like he wasn't telling the truth.
A darse cuenta que su cuerpo, que lo ha cuidado, que se ha guardado del pecado, va a ser maltratado.
Realizing that this physical body that he was in at that moment, that he had taken care of, that hadn't been led into temptation, that now it was going to go through pain.
Y a preguntarse, oye, ¿será que yo aguanto esto?
And started asking himself, can I go through this? Can I really go through this?
Quizás alguno dirá, oye, pero este está exagerando.
And you might be saying, well, no, he's exaggerating.
No, el Señor Jesucristo fue tan humano como usted y yo.
Listen, the whole point was that Jesus made himself human, just like all of us.
Y enfrentarse a lo que se venía a enfrentar, eso no era cualquier cosa.
And having to go through what he was about to go through, it's not a small task.
Él sabía perfectamente bien por dónde lo iban a pasar.
He knew where he was going to have to walk.
De hecho, fíjese que sabía que Pedro lo iba a negar.
Matter of fact, he knew that Peter was going to say he didn't know Jesus.
Sabía perfectamente bien cada uno de los azotes que le iban a dar.
He knew every single moment the whip was going to hit his body.
Sabía a dónde lo iban a llevar al extremo, lo iban a empujar hasta el borde.
They knew that he was going to be taken to the absolute edge and a little bit further than just the edge. He was going to be taken to that breaking point.
Pero lo único que le quedaba es lo que le queda a usted y a mí.
But the only thing he had left was exactly what you and I have left.
Clamar la protección del Padre.
Call out for the protection of the
Clamar
Father.
la ayuda del Padre.
Call out for the help of the Father.
Entregar su alma delante del Señor.
And give the spirit, the soul over to the
Derramar su
Father.
corazón delante del Señor.
Give everything of the
Decirle,
heart to
Padre,
the
yo no
Father.
puedo, si tú no me ayudas, hasta aquí llegamos.
And say, listen, Father, if you cannot help me right now, I can't do this.
Decirle a su Padre, Padre, por favor, ayúdame.
Pleading to his Father, Father, help me.
Pero le está diciendo, no pase de mí la copa.
But he's saying, don't let this cup pass
No,
me.
si tú quieres, pero no. Él tenía que comprender que tenía que cumplir.
So pay attention to those prayers, or that prayer. He was saying, don't let the cup pass me. He was saying, if you want it, but I don't want it to pass. I know what I have to do.
Cuando le dice, si tú quieres, pasa de mí esta copa.
He was saying, if you want the cup to pass, let it pass.
Le está diciendo bien claro, Padre mío, tú sabes lo que yo voy a sufrir.
He was telling his Father, Father, you know what I'm about to walk through.
Solamente tu amor y misericordia sabe hasta dónde yo voy a aguantar.
And he said, in other words, he was saying, only your love, your mercy knows how far I'm going to get.
No me dejes sucumbir, Señor. Ayúdame.
Do not let me falter. I need your help.
Y esa oración nosotros la olvidamos.
And that prayer, that's what we forget.
A nosotros se nos va el tiempo, Señor, dame, Señor, bendiga fulano, Señor. Pero esa oración donde nosotros nos entregamos humildes al Señor.
We have a tendency for all of our prayers to look like the following. Father, God, give me this. Father, I need that. Father, I need you to hurt that other person over there and do this or that. But we forget the being intimate with God.
Como no estamos puestos en estrecho,
Because we're not brought to the breaking point.
entonces creemos que esa oración no es necesaria.
We start thinking that that prayer isn't necessary.
Y perdemos la oportunidad de una gran victoria.
And we lose the opportunity for a great victory.
Dios me ha dado experimentar esas angustias en varias oportunidades.
God has allowed me to walk through that sort of anguish or sorrow many times in my life.
Con personas al borde de la muerte.
With people who are on the brink of death or were on the brink of death.
Y Dios me ha permitido entrar en esa angustia, en ese dolor. Y Dios me ha dado la buena palabra y me ha dado la salida por esa persona.
And I've gone into that intimate space with God, and God has given me the words to either help this person or give them a way out.
y me ha dado salida de mis problemas, mis cuestiones, cosas que yo definitivamente digo, esto es imposible, no hay forma, y Dios abre la puerta.
And in my own personal life, many situations that I was telling myself and my human eyes, this is impossible, there is absolutely no way I'm getting out of this, but the Father gave me a way.
Alguien me dijo un día que estaba orando y oyó un gemido y se asustó. He pasado esa experiencia.
Many times I've gone through the experience that I'm just praying and somebody hears a sort of agonizing cry come out.
Empieza el Espíritu Santo a gemir de una manera tan tremenda dentro de uno.
But that agonizing cry isn't from us, it's from the Spirit that's interceding for us.
Que uno se asusta.
And that intercession, it can
Ahora,
sound really scary.
Yo le hago a ustedes una pregunta.
So I'm going to ask you guys something now.
Si algo tan sencillo como una oración nos asusta,
If something as simple as a prayer makes us scared,
póngase usted a pensar cómo será el día que nos toque partir.
put yourself in this position. What do you think is going to happen on the day that we have to pass?
Que tengamos que enfrentarnos al momento real de tener que irnos de esta tierra.
That we have to confront the fact that it's our time to leave this earth.
Lo que hace que el cristiano de verdad se mantenga firme es entrar en esa comunión.
What helps a Christian maintain their sturdiness or their foundation in God is this type of prayer.
Pablo sabía perfectamente bien la situación a la que se enfrentaba o se iba a enfrentar cuando le cortaran la cabeza.
Paul knew the type of issue that he was going to have to go through and what he was going to have to feel when they were about to cut off his head.
Él no pensaba en el dolor que iba a padecer en el momento, él no pensaba en nada de eso.
He wasn't thinking of the pain he was going to feel in the middle of that situation.
Él pensaba en el hombre que hacía unos años atrás había sido raptado y llevado al tercer cielo.
He was instead thinking of the man that had gone up to heaven.
Y que vio cosas maravillosas y oyó palabras inefables, en eso era lo que él pensaba.
And he had remembered like hearing all of these things and seeing all of these things in heaven, etc.
Él pensaba que Cristo pasó por todo eso y resucitó. Dijo, ¿por qué no lo voy a hacer yo?
And he remembered that, or he was telling himself, I know that Jesus went through all of this, why can't I?
Yo tengo promesa del Señor de que Él me va a resucitar.
I have a promise from God that I too am going to come back to life.
Yo tengo promesa del Señor de que Él fue a preparar lugar para mí.
I have a promise from God that He went up there, or Jesus went up there to prepare a place for me.
Esa no es la preocupación.
So that wasn't the worry.
La preocupación es cómo soluciono lo que tengo en este momento.
His worry was, how am I going to solve this thing that I have right here?
¿Cómo arreglo esto?
How do I fix this?
Dios no me ha dicho te vas a ir ya.
God hasn't told me you're going to leave now.
Eso significa que tengo que arreglar la situación para seguir adelante.
That means I have the ability to fix the situation before continuing.
Y eso significa que si yo no puedo, tiene que ser con la ayuda del Señor entonces.
Which means if I can't solve this, that means I have to get the help of God.
Entonces significa que tengo que hacer uso de las armas que me ha dado el Señor.
So that also means that we have to make use of the weapons that God has given us.
Y si Él me enseña cómo orar angustiándome,
And if He has taught us how to pray feeling that sorrow.
yo recuerdo que una vez una persona dijo que yo los había avergonzado
I remember one time somebody told me that I had embarrassed them.
porque estaba predicando y se me quebró la voz.
Because I was preaching and my voice cracked.
Dijo que eso era una vergüenza.
And he said that that was an embarrassing moment.
Y bueno, pues para usted será una vergüenza, para mí es un honor porque lo hago para el Señor.
And I told him, well, it may be embarrassing for you, but for me it's an honor because I'm doing it for God.
A mí me importa un soberano pepino que el uno o el otro diga que yo lloro o no lloro, a mí eso no me importa.
I quite literally do not care if somebody tells me that this thing or that other thing is embarrassing as long as I'm doing it for God.
A mí me importa es que la Santa Palabra dice tus lágrimas yo las he puesto en mi redoma.
All I care about is that the Word of God tells me that my tears, God has taken it.
Eso es lo que a mí me importa.
That's what I care about.
A mí me importa que la oración aderezada con lágrimas Dios la escucha y la responde.
I care about the fact that the prayer that is seasoned with my tears, I know for a fact that God hears those.
A mí me importa que si el Señor Jesucristo, contristándose, logró lo que logró, ¿por qué no lo voy a hacer yo?
And all I care about is the fact that Jesus, in this moment of sorrow, in this moment of deep distress, he was able
¿Sabéis
to
el camino?
get all of these things done that I know that I can too.
Entonces tenemos un arma poderosa.
So again, we have a great weapon.
Que Dios nos bendiga.
May God bless us.
Que la gracia y la paz del Señor sea con cada uno de nosotros.
A ver.
Nos ponemos de pie, mi hermano.